So my question for you is, can one be spiritual and not religious?
Oh, I think one can. One can do almost anything they want. Here's the way I see the world. And I'm trying to ask those big questions of myself. I want to know, why am I the way I am? I want to know, why is Morena the way she is? I want to know, why is Vladimir Putin the way he is? I want to know why the world is the way it is. And I want to know what makes for a good society, what makes for a good person. I want to know why there's this drive for meaning that's within us. And I want to know why it is that we value good things. Why do you, Morena, say to me, I'm making notes as you're talking, that you found the key to be love and compassion and treating others the way you'd want to be treated? Your grandmother, Hope, why do we value those things? And so those are big questions that are worthy of big answers. And I think that as humans, we are hardwired to love truth. Truth and authenticity are things that when we see them, we just are attracted to them. We grab onto them. We like people who are authentic and truth. We don't like people that are deceptive. We don't like to be with people that we don't trust to be honest with us. I can't think of anyone in any marriage I've ever met who says, boy, I hope my spouse is untrustworthy and a liar. I hope my spouse deceives me. I hope my spouse is someone else when they're not around me. You know, we don't want that. Well, in the same way we don't want it in relationships, we don't want it in the world. We value truth. So people who care about big questions are going to find elements of truth that help inform their answers to those big questions. And that's why, in my opinion, as a Christian, I believe that God has so placed his truth around us in the world and in our hearts and minds and in our relationships that we will find elements of truth in all of those arenas. And I think you can look at Buddha, and the Buddhas, plural, if you want to go there, have found some of those elements of truth and incorporated them into Buddhism. The Indian faith that has developed into modern Hinduism, the same thing, as they were able to find some elements of truth, and so they adhere to those elements of truth. There are people in the world of Islam who have found some elements of truth, and they grab hold of it, and it informs their faith and their religion. There are people in Christianity who have varying degrees of truth they've grabbed onto. I would venture to say that there are people then who are spiritual but not religious. People who have found some elements of truth and grabbed hold of them, even though they're not ready to embrace any religious system. But here's where I come out on that. I come out by saying, I want the fullest picture of truth that there can be.
Right.
And so, I want, if you go back and think about the story of Cinderella, she's fled because the bell's striking midnight, and Prince Charming, or whatever his name was, is looking for her everywhere, and all he's got is the glass slipper that she had worn, and he starts trying it on to all of the different ladies in the kingdom. And some of the ladies try really hard to wedge their foot in there. They can get some toes in. They might even get it into the ball of their foot. but it's just not fitting fully until it gets to Cinderella. And in like manner, I find a lot of people are able to get their toes in. They're able to find elements of truth, rightfully so, in all these different areas. And they're loath to give it up because it resonates with their soul. They know this is authentic and this is true. And so with that resonating in their soul, they don't want to give it up for something else. And yet, I want to know where the slipper fits the whole foot and makes sense as best as possible with everything that we get. And for me, that is the basics behind the Christian faith and the presence of God, recognizing that there's a lot that's paraded as Christianity that is not Christianity. There are people who claim to be Christians that are hateful, that are spiteful, that are mean, that are angry, that are warring, that are antagonistic. I mean, even Putin is trying to invoke the Christian church as he comes into Ukraine and does the horrific things that are being done there. You go back to the Inquisitions, those are outrageous. You can find within Christianity alone, or you can find within Islam or other things, you can find warring, anti-Christian life. So I like to contrast two groups. There are people who are spiritual but not religious. There are also people who are religious but are not spiritual. Mm-hmm. And frankly, I find them even more out of touch with reality than people that like you and where you come from. So I applaud people who embrace elements of truth. I just urge people to consider whether or not you can get more of the foot in there, whether or not there's true reality to some of the picture that people don't always embrace. And that actually, you seem to be reading my future life. That actually is the next book that's coming out from IVP. So IVP published my Christianity on Trial book. And then earlier this year, Atheism and Agnosticism on Trial, Unbelief on Trial. And then next year comes out World Religions on Trial, where I try to walk through all the different major world religions, including spirituality without religion. And I try to identify, here are real positives. You know, as a Christian, I can say there's some truth in Islam, in the Muslim faith. There's some truth in Buddhism. There's some truth in Hinduism. There's some truth in Judaism. And there's, you know, and I like to walk through that. There's truth in spirituality. But then I try to put it all together and say, how does it all make sense and give me the fullest picture that I can find?
So that makes a lot of sense, but I'm going to give you an example in my life recently. Well, not very recent. My daughter was in 5th grade and she's in 9th grade now. So 4 years ago, she was attending, I had, finally started making some good money in this business and wanted to put her in private school because we've had some mishaps at the public school. And I thought, I want to put my daughter in the best school. And it was a Christian school. And I really, again, have no problem with my daughter, my kids being exposed to really everything and make the best conclusions they can. So I did. I enrolled her in this school and everything was going great for about a year. She was taking Bible class every week, every Thursday. One day she comes home crying and she said, "Mom, my Bible study teacher said that if you are not a Christian and you don't accept Jesus as your savior, that you will go to hell." And I told her that some of my family members are Muslims and some of them have never even heard of Christianity. And so does that mean that they too are going to hell? And the teacher said, "Unfortunately, yes." So I was stunned by this. I took about a week to gather my thoughts and wrote an email to the school. And I still have that exchange. If you care to read it, I will send it over to you. But it really shook me, because here's a fifth grader that is now trying to make sense of the world, of the religions. And there's this fear instilled in her that family members who, again, don't have the opportunity to learn about the religion and Jesus, that they will go to hell. Now, that has never set right with me. And I'm sure that you're going to have a very eloquent explanation answer to this, but this is what's sort of been brewing underneath the surface. And I took her out of that school and I put her in a different school. I don't think there is anything wrong with religion in general. I think religion is good. It's good. It's a good guiding compass. But I think religion, the guidance outside of us can never be the same as the guidance within us. And I'm not sure where that guidance within us comes from exactly, right? The environment, the people that raise us, the moral compass that's inherited. But I do believe that people are inherently good, and that somewhere along the way, things just sort of fall apart. But the kingdom of heaven that one seeks is within. And the part I have the most trouble with is the fear that religion teaches. And if you don't accept this God as the only God, you will go to hell. If you eat pork, you will go to hell. If you don't cover up, you will go to hell because God gets jealous. There's all these conceptions that don't feel good, don't make sense. They feel like very outdated beliefs. How can such transcendent love be rooted in fear and in limitation, is my question.
Wow, what a great question, and what a powerful experience for your daughter. I cringe over some of that. I don't think that is the way that situation should have been handled, and I don't agree with the core teaching, at least the way it was expressed. So I like to try and get rid of some of the religious language, and I like to just talk about it in normal everyday language. And if I were to do that, I would say it the following. This is fundamental to my belief system. And how I would have talked to your daughter if she had probed this question with me and my Christian faith. I believe that there is a God, and that this God is responsible for the existence of humanity. Men and women, boys and girls, this God is the reason that we exist. And this God made us in part, and in principal part, to be in a relationship with God. The Bible tells the story of the Garden of Eden, and that Adam and Eve are in the garden, and God would walk in the garden and talk to them and dialogue with them, give them chores to do, told them, you need to keep the garden, and you need to work the garden and dress the grapevines, or whatever it may have been. And there's a wonderfully intimate relationship between God and people. And God is not an amoeba that changes shape and everything like that. God is a very definite, real being. And as a real being, God actually has morality. God's morality includes honesty. God's morality includes service. God's morality includes love. And there are moral truths to God. And so God creates humanity and says, if you would like to stay in a relationship with me, then you need to be moral the way that I am moral. Because those who are in a relationship with me live God is life. But if you remove yourself from me, you will not be plugged into my life, and you will suffer what we would call death, alienation from God. How about? And so at some point, humanity in the garden, it's told as Adam and Eve, but it's really the story of all of us, have made choices not to live by God's morality. I mean, I applaud you talking about the importance of love and compassion and treating others the way you'd like to be treated. I think that's marvelous, and I agree 1,000%. But I got to be honest with you. I haven't always been that way, and I won't always be that way this week. And there are times where even the love of my life, which is my wife, there are times where I'm selfish with her. There are times where I'm not as loving and as kind as I'd like to be. And so within the framework of this, we all understand that none of us live up to that moral perfection of God. And so we as a race, the human race, have been put in a position of alienation from God. And the Christian story is, if that's the way it stays, then when we die, it's over. We don't have this eternity in the presence of God. And so God is not content to leave things like that. And God chooses instead to say, I'm going to step in and I'm going to fix this problem. And here's how I'm going to do it. I am going to become a human being. And in being a human being, I am going to not only walk in a moral and upright way and keep that intimacy with God unhindered, but I'm going to take the penalty of alienation that belongs to the rest of humanity. I'm going to put it on my shoulders, and I'm going to die with that alienation from God, knowing that God would then resurrect, if you will, bring back his godness in this God person in Jesus. But he's done so in a way that as lawyers, we would say he was the insurance company who paid the judgment that was assessed against the defendant. And it wasn't I'm the defendant, but he stepped in as my insurance company or my indemnifier, and he paid it for me so that I'm free. And the penalty, the price, the judgment has been paid by someone else. And now I know that I can live without any of that consequences of the sin. And that actually frees me up to get better and better and better with the promise of eternity with God. Now, that's the Christian message. It's not right to then take that the next step and say, but if you don't hear this story in this way and say, God, I want to be in that group, then you're automatically going to hell. You're going to suffer alienation from God. That's not what the Bible says. I mean, the Bible and true Christianity, by my understanding, says that we need to seek God out in whatever measure of light he's given us. And we need to seek to be dependent upon him for not just what we eat, say, breathe, do, or what inspires us, but dependent upon him for this relationship. I will not relate to God because I'm good enough. I will relate to God because he cares enough to bridge the gap of my unholiness or not good enough. And so people, there are tribes in Africa that'll never hear about even God. But it doesn't mean that they're not looking somewhere for truth and what's outside of them and entrusting themselves to it. And so I don't think it's fair to say, gee, you believe this exactly this way or you're going to hell and so are your family. I do think it's right to say, there is a real God who really wants to be in a relationship with you, and you're not good enough to be in that relationship on your own. You're dependent upon his mercy, and you need to throw yourself on his mercy, and you'll find that he is there for you. And we learn about it more as we grow in that relationship. But I would have worded it quite differently, and I would have come from a different place. And I don't think it was fair the way it was delivered to your daughter. But it's typical of a lot of people who just don't have a deep understanding of their faith. And so they're dealing with the cards they've got in their hand, and they're playing them as they see fit and think they're trying to help. But I'm not sure it helps. I think in a lot of ways, sometimes it hurts.